Welcome to Pivot to First. Hi, I'm Mike Seidel. I'm the CTO at Pivot CX. Every day I get to work with some of the brightest minds in the industry with one goal, turning hiring and people strategy into a competitive advantage. Hi, I'm Mike Seidel with Pivot CX, and today I'm joined on Pivot to First by David Bernstein, our Executive Vice President of Corporate Development and newest team member. And I'm very, very privileged today to have Cary Sparrow, the most innovative CEO in the HR tech industry. He's an award-winning CEO, and one thing I found out about him just before this started is he's a fellow submariner and nuclear engineer. So he and I actually have that in common, and I think we both meet maybe 2 or 3 people who have been Navy nukes in a year. After his service in the Navy, he was with Willis Towers Watson. He was started as a consultant, and he left as the global practice leader for HR function effectiveness consulting. That's a mouthful. He's also served as the VP of HR performance and analytics at Cargill. So one thing I know for sure about Kerry is he's a data guy, and he's currently the CEO at Greenwich HR, where he's helping answer some of the most important questions about human capital with better, more up-to-date data. Kerry, welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Pleasure to talk to you guys.
Yeah, so I was really surprised. You and I have something in common. We're both nukes in the U.S. Navy.
Yeah. Like I was saying, the Navy was kind enough to pay for my my undergrad education, and I got to serve for about 8 years on a couple different submarines.
They took good care of me too, so I have no regrets. I loved every minute of it.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about Greenwich and why you started it.
Sure. I founded Greenwich in 2015. The whole purpose of Greenwich.HR is to make the labor market more transparent, which is a pretty geeky mission, actually. But having worked in the HR space, helping companies build and then execute human capital strategies, HR functions, HR infrastructure, one of the conclusions I had was that one of the biggest bottlenecks for really solid effectiveness, not just for HR, but for companies overall, was not so much the processes and not so much the technology. Those were things that have been through waves of improvement, but it really was the quality of the data. And one area that seemed like there was a huge opportunity is in the transparency around labor market data, specifically who's hiring, what are they hiring for, how much are they paying, what skills are needed, what supply of talent is available out there. All of those pieces of information are really just frankly horrible in today's state. The traditional way of measuring that kind of data is really quite antiquated, and it still is. And I thought and built a team that thinks that we can do this a better way. And we bring a totally different approach to evaluating what's actually happening in the labor market. That's real time. It's forward looking. It's not backwards looking. It allows for really deep analysis, and it also allows for really innovative and very efficient applications and creative applications of that market. To put it in perspective, the labor market world in the U.S. right now, salaries and wages are about $18 trillion a year with a T. It's except possibly with some financial markets, it's the biggest market in the U.S. And yet, the information about it is completely antiquated. It is lagged. It's by months. It's not transparent. It's based on really small sample sizes. It's highly inaccurate. There's no standards for how to look at things. I mean, I could just go on and on and on about all the deficiencies. And anytime anyone with any economics training knows that anytime you have a really big market and you have really bad information about it, it means that the market is really inefficient. And inefficiency in the labor market means companies can't find the talent they need. They're not paying them appropriately. There's big inequities that happen. Individuals can't find the kind of work that leads to the most fulfilling contributions of their own talents and the development of their own skills. This is something that touches everyone, every individual, every family, every community, and yet it is extraordinarily poor as a market because of the quality of information. So we set out to change that. It's a bit of a geeky aspiration, but since 2015, we've built and maintain are continuing to grow what by our accounts is the largest and the fastest growing source of real-time labor market intelligence that exists. And we sell access to that to all kinds of folks, ranging from investment managers, hedge funds, big corporations, media companies, consulting companies, technology companies that embed our intelligence. So if you want to know what's happening with pay in the market right now, if you want to know who's hiring for what kind of jobs right now, if you want to be able to understand in detail and in a way that's very credible how skills requirements vary from Dallas to Atlanta, for example, for a certain kind of position. Those are the kinds of questions that our data can answer, and especially in today's market, which is so dynamic, where pay is changing so quickly and it's so localized. And there's all kinds of questions about, are people resigning or no? It's just really, really hard to compete, for talent. Is pay going up, or over here it's going down, and so forth. Well beyond any kind of traditional comp management, salary raises that anyone's typically seen. That kind of information is more important than ever.
So you bring up a really, really interesting point, which is the way that labor market data, as it's currently packaged up and reported in the Wall Street Journal and everywhere else, the methods that are used to collect that. I got to work a little bit with the U.S. Department of Labor in a former job, and I was just blown away by, hey, they've been doing it the same way since the 1800s. Not a lot has changed in the methodologies they're using to collect that data, so it's kind of stale. What do you think the biggest misconceptions are that CEOs and business people have around labor market data?
Well, so I'll start with a really big one and then a few others. The really big one is that even regardless of how attuned you are to the market, whatever you think about what's happening with hiring and pay and so the labor market overall is in some way wrong, right? And that's one of the things. Our data platform was designed so that it could get so precise. We track about 80% of all the new jobs in the U.S. and in the developed countries that we were in, and we're in about 59 countries.
So you're not like the current. If you go look at the labor market data that gets reported in the newspapers and all of that, most of that data comes from surveys that really aren't very up to date, right?
Right. Well, the surveys have a few. Well, first of all, let's give credit where credit's due. There is an enormous amount of statistical rocket science that goes into the way that the government evaluates the labor economy, and there's the smartest folks in the world are involved in that question, but they're limited based on where they're getting their information from. As you point out, it's largely survey based. And surveys are debilitated by small sample sizes, and they measure things that currently are as opposed to what they're going to be. They also, by measuring what they currently are, they're actually measuring past decisions. And so when you look at, who has a job, or if you look at what somebody's getting paid, what they're getting paid right now is actually a product of a decision that was made typically 1 to 2 years ago. It was a decision that was made on how to give an individual a raise, but that was based on decisions about overall budgets, which were set, 2 budget cycles ago. And so they're really significantly lagged. And so that leads to kind of one of the next biggest, misperceptions is that you can actually manage a company based on what you think is happening from published economic reports and published pay analysis. And that's just not true, because here is an example. Over the last 18 months, for all jobs in the U.S., in all markets, the median advertised pay level has gone up by 30%, 30%. So that's 20% a year, all jobs. Mm-hmm. Now, in some markets, it's gone up much more, and in other markets, it's actually dropped for certain kinds of jobs. And so the economic data washes over all of that, and it doesn't keep up either. So if you're tracking on an annual basis, if you're tracking data that's published on an annual basis, it's not at all keeping up with what's happening in the locations that you're worried about, with the specific jobs that you're worried about, and at the time scale that you're worried about. Everything is totally different. It used to be that was okay, but especially since the pandemic, that's not okay anymore.
So if I'm making decisions, like I'm getting ready to make a job offer to somebody, and I go take a look at fill in the blank government website that gives me, kind of salary expectations and that kind of thing. What you're telling me here is that that data could be bad for a couple of reasons. One is it's not local. And the other reason is it's based on what companies are paying people, which includes all those people that have just been getting their little cost of living raises and all that, and doesn't reflect what I actually have to pay to get somebody to take my job.
That's exactly right. Right. So the historical data that is what every other site is going to show you is kind of the average of the economy based on past decisions, and that doesn't do you any good from two fronts. Not only hiring people, but pay has gone up so much that every employee right now is a target for recruiters. Every employee. And so if you don't know what's going on in the market for pay for all the jobs in your company right now, it's a huge retention risk, and countless CEOs and heads of HR can attest to this right now. So it used to be that the mantra was that employees quit bad managers, but when pay is going up at the level that it's going up right now, employees are quitting to go get a better pay.
And you've seen that trend like spiking now. Is that you?
Well, it's been going on, for about the last 15 months, and in fact, we looked at it as a company. Normally, we just sell access to our data platform to folks that build applications and consulting services and other services on top of that data. So we sell to pretty savvy analytics groups. But we saw what was happening and said there's got to be an application that gets this kind of insight into the hands of all kinds of anyone who needs it, regardless of their analytic capability, regardless of the size of their company and their budgets. And so we ended up building an application to do that. It's actually, we've got a demo of it on our website. Anyone can go out and try it out. So,
yeah, but I've seen the demo, and
Mm-hmm.
I've got to say this: it is really eye opening, and you're right. It's something that somebody at any level in business really could use, whether you're a small company that's just trying to make that one correct hire, or you're growing startup, or you're a huge company. Any way you go, knowing what the facts are so you can act on them really makes a huge difference, right?
Yeah.
So any other areas where people just get it wrong with labor market data that you see all the time?
Well, something you said around it being local is so true. And historically, there's been no way to measure this. But if you look, I'll just use another example. If you look at what you're going to need to pay a nurse, a lot of that is actually based on what skills you need. And if you look at which skills are in demand the most, they vary dramatically across metro areas. Like in Atlanta, where you've got all the research that's going on, research specialties, advanced degrees, project management capabilities, command wage premiums. If you go to Chicago, where there's a lot of competition, financial acumen, financial management, operations management, all carry premiums. If you go to Dallas, where there's a lot of need for different clinical specialties, it's all clinical specialties that drive wage premiums. And so the labor market really is local. I mean, it's the one thing to remember the most, I think, is that every labor market is local. Whatever you see at a state level or a national level is very limited in its usefulness in terms of your ability to attract and retain the talent that you need, because all the situations are entirely local. Now, what's interesting too is that with the advent of pervasive remote work and hybrid work, what's local anymore? Because if you have work that can be done remotely and you're in kind of a low cost area, your local talent is getting offered positions from high cost areas. So you're not competing, in a low cost environment anymore. You're competing in a very high cost environment for those, because local just took on a very different meaning for those folks. And likewise, if you are in a very high cost area and you've got high priced talent that can work remotely, a lot of companies already know this. If you've kind of embraced a remote work approach and can support that, then you've got really the nation and the world as your potential sourcing.
And then on the flip of that is when a job can't be performed local. I've had probably 4 or 5 conversations in the last couple of weeks alone where the customer said to me, "Hey, because of paying being the topic, regardless of skills, my competition is no longer other companies in my exact business.
Mhm.
right? Because if they can now get a job at Walmart for the same, right? So now
Yeah,
I've got all these other kinds of talent competitors that now I have to kind of think about, right? Am I paying more than the local Walmart or McDonald's as well, right? And even
uh,
though I might be a caregiving service or a teaching business, or right, these different, right? Because now
yeah,
the talent can move anywhere, right?
right,
Yeah, based
right.
on pay, as you were saying. So anyway,
So
it's really fascinating.
we stopped in a fast food restaurant on a recent trip. My family and I, walking through the door, they they had listed out the starting pay for counter clerks, and it was, for day shift it was 16.50 an hour. For any shift it was 15.50 an hour, and in that state they allowed 14 and 15-year-olds to work, and for those folks it was about $12 an hour. So
Wow.
you're absolutely right. Anyone who thinks that anything between 15 and 20 is a solid wage has to realize that every other retail, every other supply chain company, every other entry level position, they're all paying this, in the same range.
Yeah, we see it with our customers every day. And one of the areas that we always, when we onboard a new customer, there's always a period of time where they're wondering, why aren't we getting enough candidates? And a lot of times it comes down to how they're marketing their jobs, and pay is a really big component of that. And this is something that I really hope that you can clear up for good for us. Pay transparency. How important is it?
Well, I think for a variety of reasons, it's hugely important. And I think you guys are in the middle of kind of the execution of the systemic changes that are coming about around pay transparency. It's interesting. I think that a lot of companies are very nervous about pay transparency, and there are a lot of forces that are working for pay transparency. There are job listing sites that, if you're not providing pay ranges, they will provide an estimate of what they think that is, which is kind of a risky proposition, if you ask me, for the hiring company. There are locations and states that are pushing legislation to require pay transparency, largely under the pursuit of equity in the pay equity in the workforce. One of the things that's interesting, though, is if there's a study that came out about 2 months ago that looked at the impact of having pay ranges on job listings versus not. And one of the things that study noted was that for those that do, the average range is plus or minus 33%.
Hmm.
Which means you can have someone at the top end of the range that's making double somebody at the bottom of the range and still publish exactly the same range. And so there's not a whole lot of equity that's and justice that's being served if folks are publishing ranges that are at that size. And I think also it's sending an ambiguous signal to candidates when you've got ranges that are that wide.
But
So
David, I
yeah,
got to ask you. I've got to
sure.
ask you a question, David, and,
Oh, what's
and
that?
because you've been looking at this for years and years, and before you joined us, you were right in the middle of this too. So, I'm getting ready to advertise a job. What's the impact if I don't put a salary on that job? I mean,
Right. So you've got the comparison to those that do, and so the message it sends when, right, the ambiguity, and in fact, I have a family member going through this right now where there's that game that the recruiter plays up front, and right, and the candidates trying not to pigeonhole themselves too much up front. So right, it just creates a very awkward set of conversations at the beginning of the recruiting cycle without it. So there's definitely advantages to to being very clear for the candidate up front. It should also reduce the amount of people that apply for jobs that they're not interested in the actual pay, right? Um, but I think what I've been seeing on the other side of this is, if you publish a range, regardless of how wide the spread is, Carrie, I'm seeing a lot of chatter on the blogs and on the social conversations around. It sets an expectation that the candidate thinks they're going to get offered at the high end, period.
Hmm.
Full stop, right?
Yeah,
Regardless. And so then you've got this other dynamic where you've set up a problem where what's supposed to be a great thing was you're making someone an offer and they should be exciting. And now they're disappointed and now you have to explain to them why they're not coming in at the high end of the range, right? For
right,
example. And
right.
so, and then the other challenge I'm hearing about is, okay, things have dynamically changed so much so quickly, but I've got all my existing employees. And so there's this
Yeah,
giant pay disparity. what do I do right for my existing people? Do I now have to bump them all up to kind of,
Yeah, exactly.
what do I do,
I
right?
mean, wage compression is a huge issue right now.
Mm.
And I think the approach to, that will sort itself out on that is as more and more companies realize that they have to compete to keep their talent just as aggressively as they have to keep to find new talent. The answers, with that perspective will present themselves.
So those inequities, though, right? And I think it probably also will shine a light on other pay disparities like gender and
Hmm.
ethnicities and other things that are
Yeah,
probably all the biases that have been hiding under the ugly rock there, right?
yeah,
So, um,
yeah.
yeah. So anyway, it's a two-sided coin, right? I can definitely see the pros to it, but I don't know, long answer to your short question, Mike. But yeah, it's multifaceted for sure. Carrie, have you started to have any of your customers really adopt this kind of full pay transparency and using the data that you can share any
Not
examples
as
of
not
how
as
it's worked?
much. I mean, more of our clients are looking for competitive intelligence on what other people are paying to set their own rates and understand what it takes for them to attract talent. I
Uh,
would say, on the human capital side, I will say the rising advertised pay levels have caught the attention of the investment community in looking at what the cost structures of companies are going to be and how adaptive companies are at responding to the labor conditions that we've got now.
yeah, because I mean, certainly all that pay trickles down to cost of goods, right? So
Right. I
yeah,
mean, everything that we just talked about transparency, we didn't talk about where there's savings opportunities there. If you're running a company, there's not really a whole lot of good news in terms of, labor cost savings other than, layoffs and automation, which I think we're going to see more pressure to rationalize organization structures and we're going to continue to see advancements in the areas of
yeah.
automation.
Well, especially if you can't find the talent, what do, right? Then you
Right.
can't
Yeah, that's
right,
what you got to do. Yeah.
retain jobs, right? Right, what?
Hmm.
Yeah, and then so it's a one-time sunk investment in a robot or something or software, but yeah, then they don't complain, they don't take vacations, and they don't ask for pay raises, right?
Right.
So
Right.
So we're
yeah,
back to the 90s where productivity is king again, huh?
I don't know if it's going to be productivity for productivity's sake. I think it's going to be, finding more efficient ways to get work done because the labor's not available to the extent that it was. I mean, for the last 15 years, we've had historically low unemployment, but we didn't see the labor shortages that we're seeing now. And these are sustained labor shortages. So it's not like all the workers just left. I
So
mean,
yeah, you bring up a really important point, which is the labor shortage we're seeing right now is sustained. It's not something that I mean, I've been hearing for years that we're going to go into an era where we're going to have a labor shortage. One day the demographics are going to change, and at some point, and I'm not sure when it happened, but it seems like things flipped, and the current conditions we have aren't going to go away anytime soon.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of question. There's a lot of ambiguity about what's actually happening right now with the supply of talent. There's the perspectives of the Great Resignation. There's the perspective that people have made too much money, during the pandemic by doing nothing, and they're still living off that money. I don't know if those perspectives are necessarily correct. I do think people recognize they have more choices now, and they're probably choosing places that are, more attractive to them personally. They've got more choices also based on pay, as we were just
Hmm.
talking about, which is, creating a pinch across all companies. I do think that there's lingering effects with the restrictions around workplace restrictions around COVID that haven't completely sorted themselves out yet.
So
Um,
that's another one where there's a big question out there. Do you demand everybody goes back to the office or not? And I do. This is anecdotal, but from talking to many of my software developer friends that maybe moved from San Francisco to somewhere where the cost of living is lower, they're finding themselves getting laid off, and it's because they didn't want to go back to the office.
well, there's several different stories that are playing out on this, right? There's companies that are pushing a return to, an office work environment, even on kind of a part-time or a hybrid basis. There are companies that frankly don't have a lot of urgency to do it, and there's a third group of companies that didn't exist 2 years ago, and almost all those companies started in an environment where work was remote, and they've got business models and operating models that are remote. And there's a growing number of those companies every week. And so I I am skeptical that the notion of going back to the office is ever going to look like what it was. And um, I'm skeptical also that those companies that are pushing hard to get employees back in the office are going to be as competitive as they want to be. There may be some where the social aspect of innovation is so important to what they're doing that they need it, but I think that's a really small fraction of companies. And that's just my own opinion. It's not based on an extensive analysis, other than just talking to a lot of folks.
So, the other thing that I'm hearing a lot more about is this concept of quiet quitting. Have you been tracking this whole thing as well?
No, say more about it. Yeah.
Uh, not quitting your job officially, but not feeling like you're getting paid enough, so you just kind of disengage and you do less. You don't go up, right, that the engagement topic. So you're still there, but you're not giving it your all. Quiet quitting. It's kind of an interesting topic, especially in the younger crowd that tends to use TikTok and others. There's a lot of chatter around this
It's
concept
interesting.
of disengaged workforce, essentially, right?
So we've been hiring a lot, and I've run across tons of folks that were interested in part-time positions with my company while still keeping their existing positions. It's like, well, how will you have time to do it? They're like, we got plenty of time.
Right. Well,
So,
what does that tell you, right?
right. I mean, so that's
Red flag, huh?
well, yeah. I didn't say we hired them, but
Right.
but to your point about quite quitting, it could be doing lots of things with the extra time that they
Right.
have kind of built into their work schedule.
And then not giving it their all to their existing
Right.
place with it, right? And
Right.
so those old ideas that, we paid people and they expected, we traded dollars for hours and expected their all and maybe even above and beyond and all that it's changing. The dynamics in this in the labor market are just tremendously different, right?
Yeah.
So
Well, and I think, the in addition to kind of all the cost implications and the productivity implications, there's a whole, emerging culture version 2.0 that is being defined as we speak. I mean, the notion of corporate culture, I think, is getting completely disrupted. And it's not just during the time of the pandemic. I think what it's going to be like going forward is and I don't know. I mean, this whole topic that we've been on for a few minutes now is just, some of the underlying trend that's shaping what culture is actually going to mean. But I actually believe, to the point about quiet quitting, I think culture is going to be even more important going forward than it has been. Because what's going to hold people to a company?
right.
Especially when jobs are so, I mean, it's so easy to get something new and better, and you can
Right.
have one or two or maybe even three of them, right?
Yeah.
So, last big question for both you, Kerry, and David. So, I was watching the news. They say, hey, we have a recession going on. What does the data really say about the job market if we have a recession? What's really going to happen here?
So overall, the job market hasn't really gotten the memo about the recession yet. The hiring is still strong and going up. It reached a little bit of a plateau over the last few months, but a plateau that is still like 200 to 300% higher than it was 15 months ago, depending on the industry and the sector that you're looking at. So enormous demand for jobs right now in historic standards. And not going down, on a week-to-week basis. Wages are continuing to go up, which means that costs are going to continue to go up, but there seems to be a lot of money out there for people to be spending in. So, like I just saw an article this morning, Walmart, due to some pretty aggressive discounting, is seeing sales continuing to go up while everyone's talking about a recession. It seems like there are certain places that are most sensitive to interest rates where there absolutely is a pullback in the economy. And there's probably a lot of companies that are using the opportunity to reevaluate where they're spending. And that could lead to more of a slowdown, but it's not showing up in the hiring data yet. I'll tell you that.
You know,
Yeah.
it's interesting because I always look through the lens of tech companies because, that's the world I live in. And tech is an area that's really sensitive to interest rates. It and I think real estate are both
Mhm.
very much that way. So a lot of what you read about bad news at tech companies really is it's harder to get capital right now to support these really rapidly growing companies that aren't very profitable. And so they have to make some adjustments to live within their means. And then real estate is real estate. Interest rates affect the cost of a home and all that very directly. So it's really, really interesting to see that. So if you are a tech company and you're looking at laying off a bunch of developers, um, here's the bad news. There's a ton of companies out there that can hire these people that aren't tech companies.
Yep.
Good example might be your old employer, Cargill.
Yeah. 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 There's a lot of places where it's not slowing down. A lot of investment that's
Yeah.
going on. I mean, back to the points we were just talking about earlier. If the labor's not there, then the pressure on automation and tech is going up.
So if you
So
connect the dots, like you said, if Walmart's lowering prices, meanwhile the cost of gas is going down, so you don't have to put much of that money into the tank. Instead, you can now spend it, and you can get more for your money. And now we're approaching. You couple that with we're about to hit holiday hiring season, right? So there's got to be some uptick even further, right, on the needs of that kind of talent. So it's just I don't know when we would see the recession. Is it going to all come crashing down in February, right?
yeah, I
No.
mean, I don't know. I mean, I think we could end up talking ourselves into a recession. I mean, a lot of times, the business outlook is based on confidence, and the more we talk about, how a recession is probably coming up, the more we start making individual small decisions that could lead us there. But I do think, um, I, we pay pretty close attention to a huge picture on hiring, which is really indicative of confidence in the overall economy, and that's not really slowing down.
Cool.
So I've really enjoyed the conversation so far. Got a couple of quick questions, Carrie, for you, and we can call today. So first off, what business book have you read that really has had a really big impact on you?
So most of my business reading now is actually listening. I listened to a few podcasts, but there is one book that I read, which is Bob Iger's autobiography. He's the former CEO of Disney when they went through some of the biggest acquisitions. He's a friend of Steve Jobs. He's just amazing individual who had amazing insight on huge deals, but also really interesting career and navigating really tricky leadership points and times in that career, and just a ton of insight there. So I really like that. On the podcast front, I'll tell you that being a small business, I love Guy Raz's How I Built This, which is interviewing all kind of startup founders that most of whom have made it, and hearing their experiences is a huge point of validation usually.
Favorite movie?
It varies. I would say my favorite movie from within the last few years was Black Panther. I just loved it. Loved it. Whole family loved it.
Okay, and is there anything that you'd like to add that we didn't cover today, or anything you want to say to the audience?
So I think we could have spent, hours and hours, riffing on what's happening with the jobs and the economy. I do think that if you're in a position where you feel like you don't know what's going on with hiring and wages, then you're not alone, and you're absolutely accurate. And our whole purpose of being as a company was designed to make it easy, your life easier. So you might want to check us out.
Kerry Sparrow, CEO of Greenwich. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks a lot, Mike. David.
David, thanks.
Glad you were here.